One of the most controversial.
All right. Why the NFL MVP was wrong.
One of the most controversial MVPs in NFL history, Josh Allen, wins it over Lamar Jackson. And it was very, very close. Both quarterbacks were incredible. But the same voters who thought Lamar deserved to be a first-team All-Pro quarterback then voted Allen as the MVP. It's a little weird. And whichever one you believe should have won MVP, it's very odd that those two things
versus
didn't match up. There are plenty of reasons why it could be. Maybe it's just because Lamar already has 2 MVPs and voters just decided it was time for Josh. Maybe it's because the supporting cast around Lamar was a lot better than last year when he won MVP. For whatever reason why Josh Allen won MVP over Lamar Jackson, it's just very weird. And the real question is, who deserved to win it? There's no denying Josh Allen did have an incredible MVP-worthy season. He ended up passing for 3,731 yards, 28 touchdowns, and only 6 interceptions while completing 63.6% of his passes. For so long, the big knock on Josh was his turnovers, but that really fixed this past season. He was still a force on the ground too, rushing for 531 yards and 12 touchdowns on 102 carries with only 2 fumbles lost. It was the fewest turnovers he's had in a season in his career. In every way, Allen was great and led the Bills to a 13-4 record. Buffalo did lose to the Ravens and also to the Texans and Rams, all good teams who made the playoffs. Then week 18, they lost to the Patriots with Mitch Trubisky at quarterback. The Bills got the number 2 seed and had to play the Broncos in the wild card and just absolutely stomped them 31-7. Then they got the revenge, beating the Ravens 27-25 to get to the AFC Championship. So Lamar and Allen split. But even if they didn't, the voting happens before the playoffs, so it doesn't matter. The Bills lost the next week to the Chiefs 32-29. A bit of a reminder that Patrick Mahomes maybe wasn't the MVP, but he wins when it matters. Josh played well in the postseason. He didn't throw any picks. He had no lost fumbles. What really ended up being so important for the MVP debate is the surrounding cast, and that's where the argument is between Lamar and Josh. The Bills had a 1,000-yard rusher in James Cook, who had 1,009
MVP is always going to be an argument. Is it for the best player or the most valuable player? Are we talking stats for the most valuable position, or we're talking about who brings the most value to their team? We never know the answer, bro.
Receiving-wise, was
from NBA to NFL.
Khalil Shakir was the top receiver with 821 yards and 4 touchdowns. Keon Coleman, a rookie, was the only other guy with over 500 yards. He had 556 and 4 touchdowns. The argument that Lamar had a better offensive line is fair, but Josh had a top 5 line. I mean, it was incredible. They led the NFL in sack rate, had the second best pressure rate when blitzed. Allen was very safe back there. The big difference between the two was really defense, where the Bills were just mid and probably not even top half of the league, or at least close to it. The offense, and Josh Allen specifically, had to overcome a subpar defense. It is very confusing that Josh Allen won MVP over Lamar Jackson just because of the way everyone else voted for first team All-Pro. Those two things should line up, but there is a great argument for Josh Allen to win MVP. There is no doubt about it. And truthfully, if I had a vote, I would have a very tough decision trying to pick between the two. There's no doubt Lamar Jackson had a much better statistical season. But then when you look what Josh Allen did and the expectations that were put upon Josh Allen this year and the Buffalo Bills, it's really impressive. People forget that the Bills weren't exactly a shoo-in to win the AFC East this year. A lot of people thought it could be the Jets with Aaron Rodgers actually coming back healthy. And of course, the Dolphins, if Tua could stay healthy, what could the Dolphins do? The Bills lost a lot of pieces. It made sense for them to decline in some way. And it wasn't going to be that overly surprising if the Bills struggled a little bit this year. But they didn't. Josh Allen put him on his back. He didn't have this great core of receivers. You know, Stephon Diggs is not there anymore, and he was still fantastic. He didn't have a 1,000-yard receiver. His running back was good, but it's not like James Cook is Derrick Henry. The reality is, even with a great offensive line, Josh Allen had to deal with more crap around him. The defense wasn't as good. I'd argue his coaching isn't as good, and his team ended up being better. better. When it comes down to the actual argument of MVP, I think Josh Allen does fit that. I think he was the most valuable player in the NFL. Without him, the Bills, I do not believe are a playoff team. He was that entire offense. He was the most important player on the team. He was arguably the most important player in the entire NFL. And without him, it's hard to see them making the playoffs. Lamar Jackson came into this season fresh off of winning his second MVP in 2023. He then had an even better season in 2024 and didn't win MVP. See, in 2023, he threw for 24 touchdowns and 7 interceptions and rushed for 821 yards and 5 touchdowns. It was a good season. So good, he won the MVP. Well, this year, he was way better statistically. He threw for 41 touchdowns, only had 4 picks, and rushed for 905 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was absolutely better. He led the league in passer rating with a 119.6. Lamar was incredible, and the Ravens went 12-5 with losses coming to the Chiefs and Raiders to start off 0-2. The Chiefs were obviously the Chiefs, but the loss to the Raiders was surprising. So was the loss to the Browns in Week 8. Then the Ravens also lost to the Steelers and Eagles. Baltimore hosted the Steelers in the wild card and didn't have too many issues, winning 28-14. The voting for MVP is before the postseason, but the Bills beating the Ravens 27-25 in the divisional was definitely a big plus in the Allen over Lamar debate. But the bigger one is probably just the supporting cast from this past season. Last year, Lamar had to do everything. He didn't this time around. Getting Derrick Henry was huge. He rushed for 1,921 yards and 16 touchdowns. That's a big thing against Lamar. He had that good of a rusher for teams to have to worry about. He also had a 1,000-yard receiver, Zay Flowers. He had 1,059 yards and 4 touchdowns. Rashad Bateman had over 700 yards. Mark Andrews had over 600, and those two guys combined for 20 touchdowns. There was a lot of talent around him. The offensive line was still one of the best in the league, and the defense was still really good. He didn't have to overcome nearly as much as Josh Allen, and that's probably why he didn't win MVP. The argument for Lamar Jackson to win MVP is pretty simple. Look at the stats. Look at what he did. What he did this season was outrageous. Passer rating, yards, rushing, passing, everything. He was unbelievable in every way. He has already won 2 MVPs, and this was the best season of his career statistically. The Ravens were incredible, and the number one person that comes back to is...
Okay, so if Lamar had the best statistical year, better than his other 2 MVP seasons, and Josh Allen didn't have better stats than Lamar Jackson, barely had more team success than Lamar Jackson, how could he win MVP over him, bro? Lamar's competing with himself for MVP. I just don't understand it. Like, unless we're talking about fucking, he had Derrick Henry this year. That's the only difference.
Season of his career statistics.
How did he have better stats and he had a better fucking running back?
The Ravens were incredible, and the number one person that comes back to is Lamar Jackson. He was the most important player on that team, and he was great, but he had a really good cast around him, and I think that finally is what hurt him in this MVP debate. Last year, when you looked around, you saw Lamar Jackson, and, you know, he doesn't have these great weapons around him. Zay Flowers was still kind of coming into his own. Derrick Henry obviously wasn't there, and Lamar Jackson kind of had to do everything. He had a decent offensive line. The defense was good on the other side, but he had to do everything. He was the guy that kept the Ravens going, and if he didn't do it, they probably wouldn't have even made the playoffs. And this year, I don't know if that's the same case. Zay Flowers had a good year. Mark Andrews, I know he started slow, ended up having a great year, caught a ton of touchdowns. They finally had some pretty decent pieces around him, and then you look at Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry is so good. And you look at Derrick Henry having a great year, and that's kind of a double-edged sword. For one, Derrick Henry had a great year because teams are so worried about Lamar Jackson. They have to be. As for Lamar Jackson, it was a little easier for him to have some open field, get away from defenders, because they did have to worry a little bit more about Derrick Henry. The pieces actually around Lamar Jackson were finally good. He had a better defense than Josh Allen. His offensive line wasn't as good as Josh Allen's, but he's still a top 5 offensive line probably. That's how good the Ravens offensive line was. His receivers were better, even though I don't think they're fantastic. He has good tight end options. I think Isaiah Likely's good. Mark Andrews had another good season. And the biggest one is Derrick Henry. Lamar didn't have to do everything. He had Derrick Henry, who, when you have another player on your team who has 1,900 yards and was one of the best players in the entire NFL over a year, it's going to be harder to win MVP, because the reality is, if you have that other great piece, it's kind of a two-way tandem. Whereas you look at Josh Allen, and you can argue a bunch of different players are the best player around him. Lamar was great. Maybe I would have even voted for...
So the MVP is for the most valuable player. So who accumulated the most wins to their team? Who helped their team win the most? Because without them, their team wouldn't win that many games. If we're doing that, then other people deserved it then. Who? I don't know off the top of my head, but I feel like like Josh Allen maybe this year, but in years past, it would be other teams or other people. I kind of understand the point though, cause it's like Lamar Jackson was the most valuable player in the NFL because Josh Allen's more valuable this year, and then in years past he didn't have Derrick Henry, so he had to do everything, I guess. But still, I don't understand.
For him for MVP, just with how
I don't think that's how I don't think that's how MVP's been.
Josh Allen was probably more valuable for his team. Josh Allen winning MVP over Lamar Jackson is pretty historic, actually. The same voters that said Allen was the MVP voted for Lamar to be the first team All-Pro at quarterback. So they didn't think Allen was the best quarterback during the season, but did think he was the most valuable player in the entire league. That's kind of odd. The final points for the award was Josh Allen with 383 and Lamar with 362. So it was very close. Josh Allen got...
And I remember there was a Steelers player that voted Lamar for like 3rd place or some shit.
27.
They put Saquon over Lamar.
Place votes, and Lamar Jackson got 23. So all 50 AP voters did believe that the MVP was one of those two. But when it came to All-Pro voting, 30 thought Lamar was the best quarterback in the league. Allen only got 18 votes, and Joe Burrow got 2. For the MVP to be a player who wasn't even a first-team All-Pro has only happened twice, and it's complicated. John Elway was the MVP in 1987, but wasn't a first-team All-Pro. It was Joe Montana. Well, that year was shortened because of a strike, and both Montana and Jerry Rice finished 2nd and 3rd in votes on the same team, so clearly that was split between the two. Then, in 2003, Steve McNair was the MVP and wasn't a first-team All-Pro. Well, that's because he was the co-MVP with Peyton Manning, who was the first-team All-Pro. So for Lamar to win it over Josh, even though he was voted the first-team All-Pro over him, and there not being any extenuating circumstances, is wild. Probably because Josh Allen had the tougher situation, or the better record, or because Lamar Jackson had already won too. But that doesn't change the fact that one of them was the first team All-Pro, the other was the MVP. So either way, it's inconsistent. When you look into the numbers and how often a first team pro wins MVP, it honestly just feels baffling that Lamar Jackson did not win MVP. And this is a weird situation where I think it can kind of mirror that Joe Montana and Jerry Rice season, except Derrick Henry wasn't getting MVP votes. But when you look at that, some people believed it was Joe Montana. Some people believed it was Jerry Rice. And even if you all thought it was Montana, it still made sense to discredit Montana in a certain way because guess what? He had Jerry Rice. When you have two great players together like that, it's hard to really argue that somebody is really valuable. I think that's one of the arguments against Joe Burrow. Everybody's been so high on Joe Burrow, you know, MVP stuff like that. But guess what? Ja'Marr Chase just had a historic season. You got to kind of take that with 2 and 2 together. When you look at Lamar Jackson, he had Derrick Henry. Even Zay Flowers had a good year. But then you look at Josh Allen, and there wasn't as much great around him. That being said, if he was able to get the Bills to the playoffs, have a great year, win the AFC, even without super high expectations, I think that says a lot. I think that says that he's the most valuable player. It makes sense to vote for Josh Allen. It makes sense why Josh Allen won MVP over Lamar Jackson. What doesn't make sense is how you believe that the most valuable player in the entire NFL was not the first team All-Pro. He wasn't the best player at his position, but he was the best player in the league. That doesn't make any sense. If Lamar Jackson was the best player at his position, which I totally understand, then why was Josh Allen not the best quarterback? Why did he not win MVP? MVP is value, but when you're taking value into consideration, don't you need to take that in consideration for a first-team All-Pro? Maybe you can argue first-team All-Pro is just really stat-based, and then MVP is really just based on value. And that's fair, but there's a reason that this has really not happened before. It's historic.
Yeah, it doesn't make more sense,
but still. I believe Lamar was going to win MVP. Just made sense. I thought it was going to be Lamar over Josh, and it wasn't. And this was just a weird, controversial, kind of confusing MVP year. And honestly, maybe they got it right, but it's hard to say. I think I would have voted for Josh Allen too, even though he wasn't nearly as good as Lamar on the stat sheet. And honestly, the eye test. But when you look at the pieces around him, it makes sense.
It kind of makes me think like Matt Ryan, for example, his MVP season. He was like, I guess statistically, I think the best player in football. He wasn't the most valuable though. He had Julio Jones with him. He was the best receiver at that time. You could argue him or Antonio Brown, but still. So where do the voters going off there? Like that's why I'm like, I feel like it doesn't make sense. Like it makes sense now for this year, but not in years past. You could argue like back and forth.
Sense.
Is he more valuable or statistically better?
Josh Allen was MVP.
Josh Allen was MVP. I guess. I love how stats matter all of a sudden when Josh Allen won MVP, but when Lamar won it last year, everyone was screaming that Stats don't paint the whole picture. Pick a damn side, man. Wait, people was arguing last year that Lamar didn't deserve it because stats don't paint the whole picture? If it was wrong this year, then it was wrong last year, and it just corrected itself. Always time for the following year to get it right. Yep, Joel Embiid type MVP shit. Team Saquon. That team is so talented, but Saquon was able. People saying Lamar didn't deserve it last year because he didn't have that good of stats. Who had better stats? Joe Burrow? Josh Allen versus Lamar. Better record. Josh's running back had almost half the yards as Lamar's. Josh had a better regular season record. You just said your shit twice. Better record, better regular season record. Josh beat Lamar in the playoffs. Playoffs don't matter. It's regular season MVP. Josh's defense was similar, if not worse, than Lamar's. Okay, 3 of the top 4 receivers between both teams were Ravens. Okay, Josh didn't have a 1,000-yard pass catcher like Lamar. Okay, he had a better receiver then. Josh put up all-time great numbers in multiple of his losses. Okay, individual games, he had better stats, I guess. Josh beat the Chiefs in the regular season because he beat one team that made it to the Super Bowl. He deserves an MVP over Lamar, I guess. But let's keep crying. But Lamar beat Josh Allen, so what are we talking about? But let's keep crying because Lamar doesn't have 3 MVPs and completely lack of relevant playoff success. Playoff success has nothing to do with the regular season MVP. Saquon's the MVP this year anyways, though. If you think so. Dak was second place in last year? What the fuck did Dak do last year? Talk about some fucking playoff success. Alright, bro. Is that the last fucking... Oh my god. Do I really want to watch Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady talk? I don't think so. I'm tired of fucking football now. Push this to the top. We need to listen to Drill. See if we can drop some new shit.